Entirenet presents the Learning and Development Industry's Thought Leadership Interview Series with your host, yours truly, Mojo Tillett. So I'm excited to talk to Aaron Silvers today. Again, we've done this a couple of times. It's been a journey, quite a journey. We talked last time you were midstream with the Experience API. Matter of fact, it wasn't even Experience API at that point. It was Tin Can.
We hadn't even kicked off.
They didn't even name it.
Right. So the first time we got together and talked about this was like Learning Solutions 2012.
Right.
Where we were just starting to kind of like try and get people on board for a kickoff of doing this. Yeah. Ah, man. It's been a crazy 2 years.
It has. But, the great thing is we're a long ways from that, right?
We got a lot done, man.
Yeah.
We seriously got a lot done.
And it speaks to community. You've been a tremendous community leader, so props for that. It's been...
I had a good community to tend.
Well, that's part of it, but you rallied everybody, and it's been exciting to watch the energy behind this. It means people wanted change, really. It means people were ready for it.
Yeah. I mean, like when you take a look and see what people were talking about, even as early as like 2008 with Let's See, and coming together for that and talking about what a SCORM 2.0 might have been,
Right. Yeah.
And you think about all the white papers that people contributed freely to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like we didn't invent something completely brand new.
Right.
We capitalized on a moment where there had been such an articulated need of like what people wanted in terms of like they want to be able to do stuff with mobile, they want to be able to do stuff with social, they want to be able to do stuff with games, they want to be able to tie it into their enterprise systems.
Yeah.
And they want to work with web services so that they're not bound to any one way that they have to build this stuff.
Yep.
So from the technical aspect, I mean, like it just got to a point where there was a really, really solid high level requirements of what we had to do. It made it really easy for us to be like, okay, let's do that. But when we did it, we thought about like, well, let's do this in a way that actually affords us to do more than just this thing. Like we could have done it where we basically did like here's your new SCORM, and it'll work with these LMSs, and it'll do these 5 things.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And instead we're like, let's do something that's completely not SCORM. And let's just work outside of that system completely and see what it enables. Because what we're horrible about all of us, not just the learning industry, but really every industry, is predicting the future. We don't know how the things that we create are eventually going to be used. Twitter was supposed to be a project management tool internally.
Right.
That it was just a communications tool. They were building a project management tool. Right. And then it turned out that was more interesting than the very project that they were funded to build.
Isn't that interesting?
Right?
Yeah.
You don't know where the things are going to go. So we wanted to create something that was as generalized as possible that could be applicable across everything. And I think that what we're starting to see since it's been a year since the launch. Yeah.
So on that, there's been some success. People are implementing it and making it's working, right? Tell us but you hear some stories?
I'm hearing some stories. Some people are starting to become more public about it than others.
Right.
Let's put it this way. So I left ADL in January after really 3.5 years, almost 4 years of it was a job I helped create for myself. It was a job that my friends and I created for ourselves. And And they're still there, and we get along great, and we hang out, and I'm sure I'll be seeing people today. In fact, there are people who've come in to take on my role at ADL who are friends, right?
Yeah,
so that part's been great. But I've been since the day I left, literally the day I left. I became the chair of the Experience API study group within IEEE. IEEE is a huge standards organization. They if you think about FireWire, for example, it's IEEE, right?
Yeah.
So what we're working on now is basically taking the Experience API out of ADL, where it's being developed within the community, and saying, okay, let's get people to focus on standardizing this in a way that is internationally recognized and not as closely associated with like any one of the parties that have been involved
Right.
in the past, and now is an open up for international adoption through ISO. So
Yeah, excellent. And you've also been doing these conferences, right?
well, we like to party, I guess. Yeah, so we Megan Bowe and I have held 3 different conferences for Under Up to All of Us. So that's kind of our banner for our own little community of practice. And Experience API has been part of that, but it's not really its main focus, but it's us.
It's what's happening. It's
one of the us, and it's really hard to separate that from us, right? So we've done that. We've run a couple of we ran a hackathon, we ran a plug fest, we ran a junto inside of a larger trade conference, a couple of years back in 2012, I guess that was 2. Busy 2 years. But we're getting set up now to do 2 different conferences almost at the exact same time, around the Experience API, focusing on that. So we're going to do, it's called Connections X API. Connectionsforum.com, if I can plug. Is that right?
Please do.
All right,
connectionsforum.com.
I'm sure I can enunciate that well.
Right.
We're doing 2 events. One is in Chicago, August 19th and 20th. The other one is going to be in London in September 3rd and 4th.
Excellent.
So we're focusing on North America and Europe first, and then if there's sufficient demand, we'll go everywhere. We don't care.
So exactly. You really focus now on the implementation of all the work that you did in the last several years, right? You're helping people kind of make it happen, put it into use.
Yeah, so we've tried to be as implementation focused as possible, like throughout. Our goal has not been an academic exercise. Like the R&D side of what we did with ADL was to explore what our options might be. That's why they had a BAA program. Once we started moving it into a spec, it was like, no, we're really the U.S. Department of Defense is really going to use this. Industry is really going to use this. Yeah. We could see the uses in K-12. We could see the uses in higher ed, in vocational education. Like we had very clear articulated use cases of where this could fit in different implementations.
Right.
Now we're actually seeing some of those come to light. So what we saw between 2012 and 2013 as the spec was getting built to a 1.0 was a number of vendors who signed on early saying, we recognize the potential this has, we see where the roadmap is going, we're going to buy into this. And without that support, without that community practice, we would have never been here. We wouldn't make it to today. Right? Fortunately, it hasn't stopped there. It's growing. It's growing, and we're starting to see organizations who are talking about, at least starting to talk about, how they're using the API internally for themselves. And so it's not just vendors building tools that support it.
Right.
Now it's organizations buying those tools and sometimes rolling their own, right? Where they're using the API in ways for which it was intended, and other ways that it wasn't necessarily intended for, but it works really, really well. One story that we've heard commonly is about systems integration. Like they're using the API as, like they have LMSs all over the organization. They could be a very large multinational. And they're using the API to simply get the different LMSs to talk to each other.
Oh,
right.
Very simple, but
very simple use case,
thing.
But just getting them to talk to each other is already a huge step forward from what that was before. Because now they can easily recognize that what an employee recognized in this system is the same employee is recognized in this system. And so they can actually get aggregated records of like, this person's actually done a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's important for an organization to have a view into that.
Mm-hmm. And we're seeing similar stories of system integration from beyond learning management systems, where they're starting to use the API to have different systems different types of systems talk to each other, be able to exchange records in a similar manner. Now, that's not all about the systems integration, but but it's interesting that where you see, in our first year, we saw a lot of like, well, let's do stuff that looks kind of like e-learning on a phone or in a game, and send, tracking messages about like what person is doing inside that content to the LMS, in that same format that we've created, in the same structure which the messages get carried across from learning record store to learning record store. Now they're using that in order just to get the entire systems to communicate across each other, which is a game changer. I mean, like the fact that it has that flexibility and both are completely valid uses.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to hear the success stories. So you have 2 conferences that are related to Experience API right now, that sounds like. When are they again?
So the one is in August in Chicago, 19th and 20th. Then like 2 weeks later, it's going to be in London, September 3rd and 4th.
Do you think there's any difference in the European audience, or
I'm curious about that.
Yeah.
What we think is likely to happen is that there's been, mostly because the US DoD was behind the spec, or at least shepherded the spec. And a lot of the vendors were U.S. based who originally bought in and signed on and participated and helped with the spec effort. I mean, we did have international help. I mean, it wasn't like invisible,
right?
But all the big meetings for when we got together to talk about the spec, they've all been in the U.S. So I mean, there's been a lot of hype around the U.S. So the ground is fertile. At least in terms of like U.S. area Twitter. But the nice thing about Twitter and the fact that this has been a campaign that's carried out on GitHub and in LinkedIn discussions is like that stuff's international. It doesn't know any borders. Yeah. So I have a feeling that there's going to be maybe a slight difference in like some of the success stories of actual implementation in the Europe side. But then again, like what I've been hearing about over the last year around the EU is a lot more actual like one would call it more trade or blue collar kind of applications of the API where it's actually very much performance based. And so like that part's actually really quite interesting. It's actually very telling about where the direction of some of these things might actually go, in not only just in the UK or in Europe, but even internationally as well. So I expect it to be different. I don't know how, but I'm excited about that.
Yeah, it's great.
We're very excited about that.
So as a community, as a collective, where do you hope to see us take Experience API? You've laid the groundwork, you've helped been part of that community to build something. Where do you hope we take it?
A couple of things. A couple of places I'd like to see us go. In the next 2 years, I would like to see the Experience API moved out of the spec space, and actually like become a completed standard. It'd be nice if we could do ISO 2 at the same time, so we could really like just full on trigger international adoption at a scale that we can't even control. But I like that.
At least to create a hook, right?
Well, but I mean, let's put it this way: what standards make possible is the fact that anybody who can access the document can easily, reliably count on it to just work. Right? Yeah. So once you have a standard, now you have a way to like basically bulletproof that implementation's gonna work. Yeah. It's not something they could ever really do with SCORM. It never happened for that. So like all the complaints that you hear about SCORM, well, we're talking about something that is like not even it's like I'm trying to do math right now. It's 35 pages of documentation as opposed to 1,700 pages of documentation. Right. Yeah. So it like figuring out how that works, how we document that internationally for adoption is a much easier challenge just in scale and scope than anything we've had to deal with in the past.
Yeah. It's a whole different beast. I really think it's a whole different beast.
I would like to see in the next 2 years where the Experience API community has worked to actually like work really well with AICC as an organization. Yeah. I'd like to see us work really well with other standards organizations that traditionally things that have come out of ADL, there's been politics and stuff like that, and it's unavoidable to some extent. But I think that we're finding people all over the place who are just like, whatever's happened in the past, like we don't want to forget it, but we also have to recognize that like we don't want to all reinvent the wheel. Like some of us are we're doing the Experience API does something really really niche, and what I'm hoping to see is that like we become a platform for people to do greater things and more important things than what the API is by itself. Yeah. How I view the API is a catalyst for doing greater things. Yeah. And it's like one ingredient. It's not the end all be all. Right. The bigger thing is coming, and it will make its way because of something that we've done, but it's not going to be that. One day the API will be outdone by something better or something bigger, something more useful.
But it may be still there. It's like,
but whatever. But like the thing is like, it's a transition to something better. Right. And I just want to, I want to be around to see what that is. Yeah. I don't imagine that I'm the guy who's going to come up with it. Maybe I'll be involved. Maybe I won't. But I'm not.
You had your piece. You had part of it.
I've had a part of it, and that for me that's good enough. I'd like to see, from a practice side, I'd like to see us start thinking about things beyond just like instructional design has been a thing forever, right? But when you try to identify what an instructional designer is or what they do, is very very different depending on who you ask. And a lot of instructional designers, when you ask them what they do, they're like, "Well, I do e-learning." I'm like, "Well, but doing e-learning is like that's the artifact of what you make." It's not what you do is solve problems for your organization, right? So what I'd like us to think about as a practice is thinking about the performance experience. Notice I didn't say learning experience, performance experience, because it has to actually map to value and outcomes that people can observe. And I think that we help enable that. Now, of course, I'm going to say that because I'm a cheerleader for the API. But the reality is that I think business is ready. And from the stories that we're starting to be exposed to through IEEE in our study group meetings, just the buzz around the community is just like, people are starting to open up to the fact that like the L&D department that they've had isn't the L&D department that they need. Yeah. Right? There's something else coming. It's going to be hard because most people in L&D come from a content background. Whatever it is, however it is they ended up in L&D, most of their job has been defined by tools that create content, right? Yeah. When you rise to the top in those organizations, you've done that through publishing of content. Yeah. Right?
Unfortunately, we're kind of bound by this. Here's the job description of an instructional designer, and that's what defines what we're supposed to do. Right. But in reality, that's not answering the question, the problem, or what the organization needs, right?
Well, yes, and so I think that though there's a transition there in terms of like figuring out like that it's not all one route. Not everybody's the same, all right? But there are patterns that we can follow, and we can and once we start understanding what those patterns are as they emerge, my hypothesis is there's patterns out there that everybody's that's going to start using the API and starting to like adopt it and start seeing results from it. And those stories are going to be very similar. And once those stories kind of come out there and get and propagate in a way that learning leaders and even organizational leaders and decision makers can understand, as well as practitioners, right? Then all of a sudden it becomes less of a fear factor of letting go of what you already know, but more of an embrace of, hey, this actually works for people that for companies that whose names we recognize, and like we're interested in having that kind of success for ourselves too.
Yeah, I don't want to mention any, but I've already started to hear some of those names. Right, there's already been some organizations that are jumping in there and
I don't want to go tooting anybody's horn with unwarranted, because some people are weird like that. But like I would say this. If you go to makingbetter.us/IEEE, not IEEE, don't spell out that, don't map to anything. On there is a schedule of when we have our study group meetings for the Experience API within the standards group. And when you start seeing who we're interviewing and who's coming in to tell their stories from their organizations, I think it starts becoming pretty illuminating in terms of like, oh, this isn't like the usual suspects in all the like the ASTD conferences or the guild conferences. Like these are companies that buy all those services, and
Yeah.
so like they're not making their own tools; they're doing stuff on their own.
Yeah.
And they're building and they're buying stuff and building
Yeah.
stuff. So I mean, like I see. I'm looking forward to the future.
Me too.
I don't really know what it's going to look like. I'm just hoping that we can make sense of it.
Yeah, I hope so too. Well, I appreciate your role in it, and I'm looking forward to watching what happens next, and our next conversation.
I hope so, man.
All right, man. Take care.
Take care.
Nice job.